In a quiet, dusty corner of a small town, where the streets were lined with faded stones and the air carried the scent of warm bread and early dreams, lived a young man named Mateo. He had no riches, no grand inheritance, and no powerful name to carry him forward, but he had something far more precious: hope, sincerity, and a heart that beat with purpose. Mateo's hands were strong from work, his eyes clear with conviction, and his soul filled with a simple but profound desire to live with honesty and to give something of value to the world. From his earliest days, Mateo had spoken of opening a shop. Not just any shop, but a place of integrity, where every item carried a story, where each exchange between seller and buyer was more than a transaction. He dreamed of a place where people would leave not only with goods, but with warmth in their hearts and peace in their minds. It was a dream stitched together by vision and shaped by years of quiet determination. So when he had finally saved enough, coin by coin, year by year, he opened his little store in a forgotten corner of the town. The shelves were simple, made from old wood he had sanded with care. The front window bore no neon lights, only a small hand-painted sign that read, "For those who value what cannot be bought." The first days were golden. Each time the doorbell rang, his heart leapt. Every smile from a customer felt like a blessing. His wife stood proudly at his side, helping with the displays, bringing in fresh flowers each morning to brighten the room. His parents, though modest in their ways, walked by often and lingered at the door, eyes soft with unspoken pride. People came not because he was famous, but because the air inside his shop felt different. It was slow, thoughtful, gentle, like stepping out of time. Mateo would greet every visitor with sincere warmth, as though they were an old friend returning from a long journey. He didn't just sell them things. He listened. He remembered their names. He asked about their families. And in doing so, his store became more than a business. It became a space where the soul could breathe. To any passerby, it might have seemed small, even insignificant. But to Mateo, this was everything. He had built something from nothing, and he had done it with honesty. Each night, as he closed the shop, he would stand for a moment and simply look around, not at the profits, but at the quiet joy he had created. In those moments, he felt rich, not in money, but in meaning. And so, with the sound of wind brushing against the window panes and the soft hum of contentment within, the story of Mateo's dream began. Not with grand applause, but with stillness, with intention, and with the beauty of a life built on truth. But as the sun does not always shine, and seasons must shift, so too did Mateo's days begin to change. The shop that once breathed with gentle laughter and warm greetings grew quieter. At first, it was subtle. A day with fewer customers, a week with fewer sales. The town's economy, already fragile, began to slow. People walked past his little store with hurried steps, no longer stopping to chat, no longer reaching for the shelves he had so lovingly filled. The once joyful bell at the door began to ring less and less. Dust settled in the corners where sunlight used to dance. The flowers his wife placed each morning began to wilt before they were replaced. And with each passing day, the silence inside the shop grew heavier. Not the kind that soothes, but the kind that echoes. Mateo did all he could. He adjusted prices, added new items, even offered to deliver to homes. But it was as if the town's heartbeat had moved elsewhere. The warmth that once lived in his chest became a dull ache, as worry quietly took root. Bills, like unwelcome guests, piled up on the counter. The rent notice on the back wall turned from a white sheet to a warning, and the smiles at home began to fade. His wife, once his greatest supporter, now looked at him with quiet fear in her eyes, not anger, just fatigue. The fatigue of someone watching a dream crumble from the inside. They began to argue, not loudly, but in sighs, in silence, in the way she looked away when he spoke of hope. Then, one morning, she was gone. No note, no goodbye, just absence. Her side of the bed, still warm, became the coldest place in the house. And Mateo, once the boy who dared to believe in honest business and simple goodness, found himself standing alone in the center of a shop that no longer welcomed anyone, not even him. His parents, who used to walk past with gentle pride, now avoided the street altogether. When they did speak, their voices were hesitant. Maybe it's time to look for something else, they'd say. A stable job, a steady paycheck. Their words were not cruel. only cautious. But to Mateo, each suggestion felt like a blade. Not because they were wrong, but because they implied the worst thing he could imagine, that maybe he had been foolish all along. And so the young man who once built a place of meaning found himself surrounded not by customers, but by the ghosts of what could have been. The shelves were no longer displays of hope, they were reminders. Every jar, every package, every handwritten sign whispered, "You tried and failed." He began to lock the shop earlier each day, not out of choice, but out of weariness. He would sit behind the counter with his head in his hands, not knowing whether to cry, to scream, or to pray. And when night fell, it was not sleep that came to him, but memory of better days, of joyful beginnings, of dreams now slipping like sand through his fingers. This was not just the collapse of a business, it was the quiet shattering of a soul that had once dared to believe. A soul that, beneath the surface, still longed to rise, but had forgotten how. One evening, as the sky began to darken and the streets of the town melted into soft shades of twilight, Mateo stood in the doorway of his quiet shop. He looked out not with anger, but with a sorrow too tired for words. Something inside him had reached its edge. Not a dramatic explosion, not a storm, but a silent, almost invisible sigh. The kind that comes when the heart, after carrying too much for too long, simply sets everything down, without telling anyone, not even himself. Mateo began to walk. He didn't pack a bag, nor plan a destination. He just closed the shop early, as he had done many evenings before, but this time he didn't go home. His feet, as if guided by something older than thought, carried him away from the noise, the memories, the expectations. He walked past the marketplace, past the houses where lights were beginning to flicker on for dinner, past the boundaries of the town where the dirt road turned rough and the streetlights gave way to stars. The farther he went, the quieter the world became, and with each step, the air grew different. It no longer smelled of commerce and cooking oil. It smelled of earth, of leaves, of stillness. The trees gathered slowly around him, not to trap, but to receive. Like old friends who say nothing, only open their arms. He walked along a narrow path that twisted through underbrush and low branches, the kind of path that no one builds but many have found. The sound of the city disappeared behind him like a dream one wakes from without remembering. In its place came a silence so deep it echoed. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence before understanding. As he moved deeper into the forest, the air cooled. A stream murmured nearby, its voice soft and steady, like a lullaby the earth sings to itself. Mateo paused, letting the sounds settle inside him. It felt like the first time in years that he was listening, not to the worries in his head, but to the world outside of it. Eventually, his legs began to tire. The road had become a steep incline, scattered with roots and loose stones. But still, he kept going, not out of stubbornness, but because something quiet inside him whispered, just a little further, not to escape, but to arrive, somewhere not marked on any map, but remembered by the soul. When he finally reached a clearing, he saw an old oak tree standing alone, its branches wide like arms, its bark furrowed with time. And it was there, under that tree, with the last light of day slipping through the leaves, that Mateo sat down. He didn't speak, he didn't pray, he didn't try to make sense of anything. He just sat, his back against the tree, his breath slow and deep, his hands resting open on his knees. The pain was still there, but it was no longer pressing against him. It was simply present, like a quiet companion. For the first time in many months, Mateo allowed himself to feel everything. The regret, the loss, the exhaustion. He didn't push it away. He didn't try to be strong. He just let it be. And in that sacred silence, surrounded by nothing but trees and wind and sky, something ancient stirred. Not a solution, not an answer, but a shift. Like the earth turning gently beneath his feet, Mateo had not found a new path. He had only stepped off the old one. But even that was enough. Sometimes, the most important journeys begin not with direction, but with surrender. He did not know where he was going. But for the first time in a long time, he was no longer running from himself. And so, Mateo sat beneath the old oak, not seeking answers, not demanding explanations, just breathing. The forest did not ask him who he was or what he had lost. It simply embraced him, as if to say, "You are still here. That is enough for now." The wind whispered softly through the leaves above, brushing against his cheeks like a mother's hand. His eyes, half closed from weariness, caught the shifting light on the branches, the slow dance of shadows across the ground. It was as if time itself had decided to stop and sit with him, not to lecture, but to listen. Then, in that quiet moment, a sound behind him, gentle, almost imperceptible, not threatening, just there. Mateo turned and saw an old man standing a few steps away. He hadn't heard him approach. The man was thin and weathered, leaning lightly on a wooden staff. His robe was simple, the color of dust and sky. His eyes, though surrounded by countless lines of age, glowed with something beyond time, clear, still, undisturbed. He said nothing. He simply looked at Mateo, and then, slowly, he sat down beside him under the same tree. No rush, no ritual, as if they were two old friends who didn't need words anymore. Mateo felt the urge to speak, to explain himself, to say why he was here, or what had gone wrong. But the presence of the old man didn't ask for stories, it asked for stillness. And so, they sat in silence, not an awkward silence, not the silence of people who don't know what to say, but the deep, meaningful silence of people who understand that words are sometimes too small for the heart. The old man looked out toward the trees as if watching something no one else could see. His breath moved calmly, like waves that had forgotten how to crash. And beside him, Mateo slowly felt the rhythm of his own chest begin to match it. Slower, deeper, lighter. It was strange, comforting, but unfamiliar. This man did not offer comfort through hugs or sympathy. He offered it through presence, through being fully there, without judgment, without pressure. Finally, the man turned his head ever so slightly, just enough to speak, but not enough to break the spell of silence. "You carry a great weight," he said, in a voice softer than the breeze. Mateo looked down. "I've lost everything," he replied. "My work, my family, my strength to keep going." The old man's lips curved into the faintest smile, not pitying, but knowing. He did not rush to reassure. He did not say, "It will be okay." He simply let the truth sit, like a stone between them. "You've lost many things," the old man said gently, "but not everything. You are still here, and you still hear the silence." Mateo furrowed his brow. "The silence?" The man nodded. "Only those who have stopped pretending can hear it. Most run from it. But you stayed. You listened. That is why I am here." There was no boast in his voice, no claim of enlightenment, just a quiet offering, a kind of mirror held up, not to reflect flaws, but to reveal possibilities. Mateo didn't know who this man was. A monk? A sage? A wandering stranger? It didn't matter. What mattered was that in this moment, he felt seen, not for his failures, but for the courage it took to keep breathing through them. And as the sky above began to shift from afternoon gold to the deeper blue of dusk, Mateo understood that this was not just an encounter, it was an invitation, not to return to the world as he had been, but to begin again, from silence. And so, after what felt like a lifetime compressed into a moment of silence, the old man finally turned fully toward Mateo. There was a kindness in his eyes, but also something firm, like a mountain that had seen many storms and remained unmoved. Without asking questions, without needing a backstory, he spoke gently. "Would you like to know why your path became so heavy?" Mateo nodded, almost in a whisper. "Yes, I want to understand." The man didn't reply immediately. He reached down, picked up a small twig, and began drawing circles in the dirt between them. "Then we begin with the first shadow that follows every dreamer," he said softly. "Laziness." Mateo almost flinched. "But I'm not lazy," he replied quickly. "I worked hard. Every day. I opened my shop early. I gave it everything I had." The old man nodded, still drawing in the dirt. "Yes, you worked. Your hands moved. Your body moved. But laziness does not always wear the face of sloth. Sometimes it comes dressed in waiting, in hesitation, in the silence between knowing and doing." Mateo furrowed his brow. "You see," the old man continued, "true laziness is not always lying in bed or wasting the day. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to delay what matters most. It's postponing the difficult call. It's telling yourself, tomorrow I'll try again, while knowing in your heart that tomorrow will come and go like the last one. Mateo looked down at the circles in the dust. His chest grew tight. The memories returned, not of failure, but of hesitation. The proposal he never sent. The customer he never followed up with. The idea he wrote down but never built. You see, the old man said with a faint smile, we often mistake effort for courage. But courage is not just doing what you like, it's doing what scares you. Laziness hides in fear. In the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment, the fear of failing again. Mateo swallowed, words caught in his throat. The man added gently, when the mind is full of excuses, even a strong body cannot save the day. You woke up early, yes. But how many times did you avoid what truly mattered because it felt too uncertain, too exposed? A breeze passed through the leaves above, and for a moment it seemed to carry away the weight of denial. Mateo lowered his gaze, remembering all the tasks he avoided, all the dreams he filed away under someday. I see now, he murmured. It wasn't the work I avoided. It was the fear behind the work. The old man gave a soft nod. Exactly. Laziness often wears a clever disguise. It tells you you're tired. It tells you you're not ready. It tells you you're just waiting for the right time. But in truth, it is a whisper that keeps you small and convinces you to remain still when life is calling you forward. Mateo took a deep breath. This was not an insult. It was a mirror, one that reflected with painful clarity, but also with grace. And how do I change that? He asked quietly. The old man's eyes softened further. By moving, even when afraid. By doing the task you least want to do first. By meeting your hesitation with one small, imperfect action. It doesn't need to be big, it just needs to be real. He looked at Mateo and said, the battle with laziness is won not in grand victories, but in quiet choices. One moment of effort, one honest attempt, again and again. Mateo nodded, the lesson settling into his chest like a seed in fertile soil. And somewhere deep within he felt it, the first stirring of movement. A decision, long delayed, finally beginning. The old man let the silence linger, giving Mateo space to breathe in the weight of what had just been said. But soon his gaze lifted once more, calm and steady, like the surface of a still lake. Without raising his voice, he continued. Now let us look at the second habit, one that traps many good people for most of their lives. It is the illusion of not having enough. Mateo's brows drew together, unsure. But I really didn't have enough. The bills kept coming. The income was small. I was doing my best. The old man gave a soft smile, not of judgment, but of knowing. I believe you, but listen closely. This is not just about money. This is about a mindset. A way of seeing the world as a place of lack, rather than one of possibility. That illusion does not begin with numbers. It begins with fear. He paused, letting the words sink in like gentle rain. When we believe we don't have enough, the old man continued, we live with tight fists and anxious hearts. Every coin that leaves our hands feels like a loss, and every risk feels like a threat. We delay generosity. We avoid investment. We spend when we are scared and save when it's too late. Mateo looked down, reflecting on the times he had avoided saving even small amounts, or the times he had rewarded himself impulsively, after one good week, as if fearing the next would not come. The old man saw his silence and gently asked, how often did you wait until the end of the month to see what was left before you saved? Mateo nodded slowly. Almost always. That is the illusion, the old man replied. We think saving is for the rich, but it is saving that helps people become rich, not just in wealth, but in confidence, in freedom. When you pay yourself first, even if it's only a few coins, you are sending a message to your soul. I am worthy of a future. The words felt strangely powerful. Mateo realized he had never thought of saving as something spiritual. It had always felt like math, but now it sounded like love, like respect, like self-trust. It's not about how much, the old man said. It's about how consistently. A stream, even if small, will one day carve through stone, but a flood that comes and goes leaves no path. Mateo felt a quiet shift inside, a recognition. He remembered all the small opportunities he'd ignored, times he could have set aside just a little, but in the illusion of scarcity, he had spent it, hoping to feel better. And yet, the emptiness had always returned. The old man's voice softened even more. We do not save only for rainy days. We save so the soul does not live in fear, because fear makes people desperate, and desperation makes people blind. He looked at Mateo with warmth. When you learn to keep even a little, your mind begins to relax, your heart feels less chaste, and from that peace, wisdom grows. Choices become clearer. Life feels less like survival and more like creation. Mateo breathed in deeply, as if for the first time he understood that having little didn't mean being powerless. The power had always been in how he used it, how he honored it. The old man smiled gently. To believe you do not have enough is to stay small forever, but when you act as if you are already becoming the person you dream to be, even with one saved coin, you begin to transform. And in that moment, Mateo felt the illusion crack, just enough for the light of possibility to come through. The old man leaned back slightly, letting the breeze stir the leaves above their heads before he spoke again. His voice was steady and unhurried, like a river flowing through time. Let's speak now of the third habit, he said gently. It is one that often wears a smile but hides heavy chains. It is the cage of comfort. Mateo raised his head, puzzled. Comfort? That didn't sound like a bad thing. He had longed for comfort, especially in the hard months. The comfort of security, of peace, of not having to struggle anymore. The old man noticed his confusion and offered a kind smile. There is a kind of comfort that nourishes, like warm bread or a safe embrace, but the comfort I speak of is the kind that lulls you to sleep while your dreams quietly wither. He paused, then added, it's the comfort that tells you, stay where you are, don't try again, don't risk the pain. And so you build a life not on growth, but on avoiding discomfort. Mateo felt a small ripple inside. He thought of all the times he had chosen the familiar road, even when his heart called him elsewhere. Of how he had once had ideas, bold and fresh, but pushed them aside because they might fail. This comfort, the old man continued, whispers lies. It tells you that the pain of change is worse than the pain of regret, so you stay, you wait, you convince yourself that now is not the right time. Mateo closed his eyes briefly. He remembered a plan he had shelved, a partnership he never pursued, an offer he declined. Not because they weren't good, but because they were uncertain, uncomfortable. Comfort can become a golden prison, the old man said softly. No bars, no locks. But the door stays closed because you are afraid to open it. You decorate the walls with excuses. Maybe next year, maybe when I have more money, maybe when I feel ready. But my son, he added, looking into Mateo's eyes, readiness is not something you find, it's something you decide. The words fell like pebbles in a still pond, spreading quiet waves of truth. You think you need safety, he said, but what you truly need is movement. Life grows through challenge, not repetition. A tree does not bloom in a comfortable pot. It must push its roots into the unknown soil. Mateo breathed in deeply, something shifting inside. He had mistaken stillness for peace. But in reality, it had been fear with a soft face. The old man touched the earth gently beside him. Even the ground must be broken for seeds to grow. Are you willing to be broken, Mateo? Not shattered, but opened? Mateo looked down at his hands, once so full of hope, then curled in quiet retreat. He nodded slowly. I think I am. The old man gave a warm, approving smile. Then you have already stepped outside the cage. Now all you must do is keep walking. And as the wind stirred again, Mateo felt something deep within him stretch its wings, not ready to fly yet, but ready to awaken. The old man remained still for a moment, letting the silence do its quiet work. Mateo sat beside him, eyes lowered, but something in his posture had shifted. He no longer slouched under the weight of confusion. Now he listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole being. With a voice as steady as the mountain air, the old man continued, Now, let us speak of the fourth habit. It is not glamorous, it is not loud, but it is the thread that weaves dreams into reality. It is called discipline. Mateo exhaled gently, that word again, discipline. It had always sounded cold to him, like strict teachers, military routines, or rigid calendars. It reminded him of pressure, of endless musts and shoulds. But the old man seemed to sense this. I know what you're thinking, he said with a knowing smile, but true discipline is not a prison. It is a compass. It does not cage you, it frees you. He leaned forward slightly, as if to let the truth travel more directly. Discipline is what keeps you moving when motivation is asleep. It is the quiet strength behind every great journey, and it's built not by force, but by love. Love for your purpose, love for your future self. Mateo's eyes widened slightly. He had never thought of it that way. You see, the old man said, most people wait until they feel inspired, but feelings are like the wind. Beautiful, yes, but unpredictable. Discipline, on the other hand, is the ground beneath your feet. It's what allows a seed to grow not just once, but again and again through every season. He paused to look at the trees around them, tall and unwavering. These trees didn't grow by chance. They didn't stop stretching just because one day was cloudy. And neither should you. Mateo thought of all the things he had begun with energy, his business, his routines, his plans, and how many had slowly faded, not because they lacked meaning, but because he lacked the rhythm to sustain them. Discipline is not about doing everything, the old man added gently. It's about doing what matters most, especially when it's not easy. It's waking up for your dreams even when they feel far away. He turned to Mateo. When you say you'll do something, do it. Not for others, but for yourself. Because each time you keep a promise to yourself, you become someone you can trust. Mateo felt a warmth rise in his chest. Trust. Yes, that was what he had lost. Not just the trust of others, but his own. He had stopped believing in his ability to follow through, and that wound had bled silently for years. The old man's voice softened. Even the smallest act done daily becomes mighty. A drop of water carves stone. Not through power, but through consistency. Mateo nodded slowly. He could see it now. Discipline not as a punishment, but as a devotion. A steady fire that warmed without burning. A gentle hand guiding him through the fog. And in that quiet moment, under the branches of ancient trees, he made a silent vow, not to be perfect, not to never fail, but to keep walking forward, step by step, with the strength of discipline humming in his heart. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to a faraway memory carried by the wind. Mateo sat in silence beside him, the rhythm of their conversation now as calm and steady as the breeze, moving gently through the trees. And then, with the same quiet grace that had guided every word before, the old man spoke again. There is one more habit, he said, one that seems harmless, even noble at times, but it is perhaps the most dangerous of all, for it dries up the very river that feeds your soul. It is the habit of ceasing to learn. Mateo blinked, puzzled. Learning? He echoed softly. But I'm not in school anymore. The old man smiled, not mockingly, but with a warmth that carried no judgment. Ah, and that is the trap, isn't it? The belief that learning ends when formal education does. But the truth is, real learning begins the day you step out of the classroom and into the world. He picked up a twig from the ground and pointed toward the small stream nearby. You see that water? He asked. Always moving, always seeking. That is what learning should be like. A river, never stagnant, always flowing. When water stops moving, it grows murky. It attracts decay. So does the mind when it stops growing. Mateo followed the stream with his eyes, watching how it curved between roots and stones, never fighting the path, only adjusting and continuing forward. Many people, the old man continued, believe they cannot afford to learn anymore. I don't have time, they say, or what's the use? But knowledge is not a luxury. It is your foundation. It is the lantern that lights your path in the darkness. He looked directly at Mateo now, his eyes steady and full of unspoken truths. You say you failed, but ask yourself, when was the last time you truly learned something new? A skill, a craft, a lesson from someone wiser than you? Or did you stop searching, assuming you already knew enough? Mateo thought back. There had been a time when he read, when he asked questions, when he stayed curious, but over the years, burdened by pressure and disappointment, he had stopped. He had traded wonder for worry, exploration for exhaustion. The world is always moving, the old man said, his voice like a whisper carried on pine needles. And those who stop learning are left behind, not because they are less capable, but because they have chosen to sit while the river moves on. He let the silence settle, giving space for the truth to find its place in Mateo's heart. Then, with a gentle nod, he added, You don't need to learn everything, just something. A little each day, one idea, one new way of seeing. That's enough to keep the river alive. Mateo felt his breath deepen. The idea was not overwhelming. It was freeing. Learning didn't mean pressure. It meant movement. It meant opening his eyes again, being humble enough to admit he didn't know, and brave enough to begin again. Books, people, mistakes. These are your teachers now, the old man concluded. Let the world be your school and never stop showing up. And as the leaves rustled gently above them, Mateo felt something shift. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but like a stream finding a new path. Quiet, constant, alive. As the light began to soften in the forest and the air grew still with the hush of early evening, Mateo sat quietly beside the old man. Something inside him was no longer trembling. It was expanding, like the breath of a long-forgotten song rising again from silence. His burdens hadn't magically disappeared. The debts, the losses, the memories, they still existed. But for the first time in a long time, they no longer ruled his soul. The old man had not given him instructions or promises. He had not offered a quick solution. What he had given was far more valuable, a mirror to see himself clearly, and a lamp to walk forward with awareness. And now, that gentle lamp was glowing inside Mateo, not because someone lit it for him, but because he had dared to strike the match. He rose slowly to his feet, brushing off the dust from his journey. His body still ached from the climb, but the ache no longer felt like defeat. It felt like proof. Proof that he had walked through something difficult and survived. That he had faced not the world outside, but the habits within that had quietly chained him. The old man stood as well. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His silence now felt like a blessing, like the sacred hush after a prayer. Mateo bowed slightly, not out of obligation, but from the heart, a gesture of deep respect for a man who had taught without teaching. As he walked back down the path that had once been aimless, everything looked different. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. The trees were still trees. The stones were still stones. But Mateo now noticed their beauty, their presence. Each step he took was filled with intention, no longer dragged by the weight of regret, but guided by a quiet purpose. And when the first rooftops of the town appeared in the distance, he felt no dread. He didn't fear returning, or being seen, or starting over. He knew he might fail again. He knew he might face doubt, loneliness, or difficulty. But now, those things didn't terrify him, because he had begun to understand the truth that real failure is not falling, it is staying on the ground, and real success is not applause or riches. It is rising, one more time, with a wiser heart. As he stepped into the familiar streets, he smiled at an old neighbor. She nodded in return, surprised by the peace on his face. Children laughed nearby. A breeze lifted the scent of bread from a distant bakery. Life had not waited for him, but it welcomed him now because he had finally returned to it. Not as the same man who left, broken and afraid, but as someone reborn, not by magic, but by awareness, not by fixing the world, but by healing the way he saw it. This, dear listener, is the quiet power of awakening. It does not shout. It does not boast. It simply begins again, with eyes open, a heart lighter, and steps that finally know where they are going.